My name is Jacek Bartosiak. Welcome to Strategy&Future.
Welcome to episode 4 of Flows and Frictions. Joining me on the line today is Radek Pyffel. Radek, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Thomas. Thank you very much for invitation. It's a great pleasure to be your guest.
Your job title is Proxy for the Management Board of PKP Cargo. I'll explain to listeners that PKP Cargo are the second largest railway freight carrier in the European Union after Deutsche Bahn. Can you tell us more about what you do?
Oh yeah, maybe it sounds quite confusing, but it's a very simple job. I just represent the board, talking to the boards of other companies in Asia. So after being the representative of Poland in the board of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, I got an offer from the railway company, which is PKP Cargo, the second largest railway company in Europe, as you have already mentioned. And the job is to represent the company in Asia, basically in the Belt and Road countries. This is the job actually I have been doing in the last 2 or 3 years. Yes, it's a very interesting job because we operate from the Western Europe to Pacific Asia. So I do a lot of business travels to Belt and Road countries, including Belarus, Kazakhstan, and certainly China. And that's the job I do have now, and that's the meaning of this word, proxy of the board.
My next question is about Chinese. How old were you when you started learning it, and was it difficult?
Maybe you want me to switch into Chinese, or shall we start a conversation in Chinese? 要不要我们现在讲中文?
I know one phrase in Chinese which is 我很喜欢和中国下。
我很喜欢和中国下。Okay, 那我们现在讲中文吧，好像你的中文很好。It's a good question actually because it started in the 90s. So I started to learn Chinese when I was studying at Warsaw University. And there was a very strange idea that came to my mind in the 90s because we have to understand the context. And the context is that at that time, many, there was a very special time for Poland and I think the whole Central Eastern Europe, because that was the reintegration with the West. So everybody was thinking about, studying and learning Western languages. So a lot of my classmates, my colleagues, they were going to UK, USA, and Western Europe. And I decided to go in the opposite direction. I still don't know why, Chinese, usually they say it's a destiny. But I had, I was pretty much sure that I want to study Chinese, and nobody believed it made sense at that time, So all of my colleagues, they found it as a completely senseless idea. So why do you want to study Chinese? I mean, there were so many opportunities at that time when after 45 years of communism, like Poland opened up and you had these opportunities to go to visit Western European countries. And I decided to start studying Chinese. Maybe because of the influence of my father, because as a little boy, I was getting postcards from my father from the North Africa, from Sudan and Egypt. So then I could see the postcards and I could see the pictures of my father talking to the people on the streets of Egypt and Sudan. So I decided to go out of Europe, which was not very common in the 90s Poland. Was it difficult? Well, I would say it's a completely different language. So it's got completely different structure. So definitely for the European, I guess it's much easier to study Spanish, Italian, or any other Swedish or any other European language because the structure is very much the same. And in Chinese, you have tones, writing is different, so you have to learn how to write characters. So I think the first 6 months of studying Chinese, there was learning, actually developing the methods of learning and absorbing the language. But I think after 1 year, I was able to talk on the phone in Chinese. And slowly, gradually, step by step, I started to speak Chinese. Now I can communicate, which is very useful in China, especially, because usually when anyone from Europe, going to China, sometimes it's very hard to understand what's going on around you. So I think the language helps a lot.
Tell us about your first time in China. I've read on Twitter you have an English language account and you have a Polish language account, and I've read your English language tweets, and one of them has you moving to Guangdong to study at Zhongshan University in 1999. So that's 20 years ago. I thought it was really interesting that this was 20 years after Deng Xiaoping's famous economic reforms of 1979. So that means that we've now reached the point in 2019 where the year that you moved to Guangdong is now the halfway point in this dramatic transformation that China has experienced. So, can you tell us what was it like moving to China's third largest city, and was it clear to you then that China would develop into such an economic powerhouse?
Oh well, first of all, that was quite symbolic because that was September 1st, 1999. So this is quite symbolic date in Poland. I was quite surprised to see so many skyscrapers in China. So that was my first impression when I arrived at the airport, and then I took the taxi to the Zhongshan University, and I could see like a lot of skyscrapers on the way to the university. I didn't expect that, because I have read a lot of books about the Maoist time, and that was pretty much different, the Guangzhou. I have to say that Guangzhou was pretty much different comparing to other cities in China, because that was the first, that was the vanguard of the Chinese policy of opening up, and there was a vanguard of Chinese reforms, at least. And also, like usually when I had this picture of China, the image of China, there was a Great Wall, and like kind of imperial China, Beijing, and this kind of images. But Guangdong was pretty much different from that. It was much more liberal, I can say. The weather was different. It was very hot. It was very warm. And there is a Chinese proverb that the mountains are high and the emperor is far away. So that was different. And I started to learn Chinese before I had come to China, and I was unable to communicate. So even the taxi drivers, they laughed at me because they couldn't understand me. So that was quite a disappointment, because I've been practicing so hard, and I had a Chinese teacher, and she was always like shaking her head in approval. So I thought that my Chinese was, I don't know, at least good enough to communicate, but when I arrived at the airport, nobody could understand me. So that was quite a disappointment. But I started to study really hard, and in the next 3 months, people started to understand me. So I had a good intonation, and I started to be understood. I may say I'm a lucky man. I'm really happy that I have been witnessing the fastest and the largest transformation in the world's history, because I believe that nobody went through such a, really deep transformation in such a short time and in such a large scale as China did in the last 30 or 40 years. And I could see that. So I could witness all these changes from the perspective of, the foreign student, because I've been studying in many places in China. After a couple of years, I moved. I've been studying in Taiwan as well, and then I moved up north to Beijing. So that was really interesting, because myself, I come from Poland, which is also the transformation country. Poland was also transforming very fast since 1989, but in China the speed that was enormous. Sometimes I've been away for 2 weeks in Guangzhou. When I was living in Guangzhou, I've been away for 2 weeks, and then after 2 weeks, I could see there was a new settlement or a new street. So So the city was transforming really quickly. So there was something which is I think unimaginable, and sometimes it's very hard to understand for the people who haven't seen that. So whenever I talk about China to foreigners, sometimes it's hard to believe it how fast the transformation was, and it was also I could see a lot of complex social issues, social problems, and a lot of challenges ahead of China in the last 20 years, and the way sometimes in a very painful way this problems were being resolved. So that was really fantastic time, and I may say I'm a happy person that I could witness that I've been witnessing the fastest and the largest transformation in the world's history. But now China is on a different stage, so probably your next question concerns the the next stage.
Yeah, just on the pace of change, it reminds me of the Graham Allison TED Talk where he shows the video of the bridge being built in America versus the bridge being built in China. And in China, I think they build the bridge overnight. So this idea of the pace of change is really communicated well by Graham Allison in that talk. I would like to move on to the connection between Poland and China. So maybe let's try to talk in fairly simple terms now about the geography of the Belt and Road Initiative. I think I'm correct in saying that in terms of east to west connectivity between China and Europe, there are currently two main corridors or arteries. One is the sea route via Singapore and the Suez Canal, and the other is an overland route through Russia, Belarus, and Poland. This is what exists already. What are the main changes that we will see if this Belt and Road vision is fully implemented? And I talked about east to west connectivity between China and Europe, but is there more to it than this?
Oh yes, thank you very much. It's a very important question, I think, and it concerns Poland and this part of the world because 80% of the trains coming from Pacific Asia to Europe, to Western Europe, they cross Polish border. I think 90% of the trains, but there's a place Malaszewicze on the eastern border of Poland and Belarus, and the 80% of the trains coming to Europe enter there. So yes, there are some efforts to create the new routes, but still, I think Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Poland are on the way. So it's very hard. It's very hard to establish the new corridors, and it's very hard to create the alternatives. So what we can expect from the future, I think there will be, more routes and more transportation corridors. Although I think you are right mentioning about the main corridors. It will not be changed. I think we will. Sometimes we say it's a Belt and Road Initiative, but I would say there are many roads and many belts, and I expect that maybe some new corridors will be established, will be developed in the future, but I don't expect that it will change. It will be changed. So Poland will remain on the main route from the Western Europe to Pacific Asia. So maybe the volume will decrease. Maybe it will not be 80% as it is now. Maybe 70 or 60%, but still the main route will lead through this part of the world. That's what I'm sure. That's what I can observe working for the railway company. So what does it mean for the world? I think first we have to define what is Belt and Road Initiative. Because there are so many definitions that nobody really knows what it means. So this debate is going on. I think that we are discussing the logistics. We are discussing the transportation corridors. But besides transportation, there are other aspects as well. And basically, I would say that the Belt and Road Initiative, that's the initiative of China coming out of China. So this is like coming out, going out policy, I would say. And this is exporting of Chinese overcapacity. Because in the last 30 years, which we have already mentioned, China succeeded in developing the country, and now I think it's exporting its capacity out of China. And the perfect example of that is Africa, which actually became the area of the some people say the projection of Chinese economic power. And I think, like every country in the world, experience this in a very much different way. But I think Central Eastern Europe and Poland, we due to the geographical location, sooner or later we will have to face the consequences of exporting Chinese overcapacity. So I would distinguish these two matters, these two aspects of Belt and Road. So one is this exporting of overcapacity, and the second is its consequences in establishing the new transportation corridors and the new routes. So, well, I think that if we talk about this debate in Poland concerning the Belt and Road Initiative, there's a kind of competition, I would say, between many countries in Central Eastern Europe, because there's this term of gateway to Europe. So there are many countries which have aspirations to be the Chinese gateway to Europe, but in fact, due to geographical location, Poland is probably the best place for such a gateway. The problem is that Poland itself is not very much enthusiastic about the Belt and Road Initiative. As a country which is an ally of the United States of America, we're not very enthusiastic about this project, even though the geographical location, and even though that many countries, like for example Hungary, I think Hungary in the Central Eastern Europe is a perfect example of that. They try to attract China, and they try to attract Chinese investments to become such a gateway to Europe, to become a place where the new investments will create new logistics hubs and new jobs and new centers of operation. But the situation is very dynamic, I might say. The problem is that the investments that China could offer us were something very much different that we expected. So we had Chinese company winning a bid for building a highway before the Euro Cup, the Football Euro Cup, Football European Championships in 2012. But they didn't do well. So now we have another companies. They learn a lot, so they win another bids, but it's not that easy. And I think Africa is much better market for Chinese companies, because it's so huge and Poland is so small, and the market is so competitive. So, well, we will see. We will see. As I said, the situation is very dynamic, but Poland is a very important part of this project due to its geographical location. Because if you want to establish the shortest route from Asia to Europe, Poland is always on the way. So I think it's a good thing for me, as I work for the railway company, because we have a lot of business. We operate straight from the border of the eastern border of the European Union, which is also the eastern border of Poland. And we deliver a lot of goods to Germany, which is also a very important part of this project. And we will work on developing the new corridors to southern Europe. So yes, and this market is growing, so like around 10 to 20% a year. I think it's got future. At least I would like to work hard to develop it, and so this idea of connectivity, I'm pretty much sure will be very much important for Poland and also for me personally.
We've talked about the logistics map of Eurasia and how it might change in future. But what we haven't talked about is the goods that are being transported, I guess mostly from China to Europe. I'll ask you maybe later about if this is all one-way traffic. But yeah, can we talk about the kind of goods that are being shipped and transported from China currently? Maybe also about the research that's being done in China into the kind of goods that they would like to sell to us in the future. And I guess from there, you can also talk about the education system in China that's producing the next generation of researchers there.
This is a good question, actually, because the biggest concern in Poland is the trade imbalance we have with China. I guess the main concern in many other countries, the trade imbalance. But to my surprise, when I traveled to China and I talked to many municipal governments in China, they started to think how to deal with this trade imbalance. I think in the interest of China, because the problem is that I think 85% of the trains are coming back to China empty. So if you want to make this business profitable, I mean, this logistics business and the railway business, that means that you have to load up the containers going back to China. And if you want to load up the containers going back to China, then you have to find the products to import from Europe to China. And I think also that the main idea, that the idea of Xi Jinping is that's the idea of that the structure of Chinese international trade, the Chinese trade shall be slowly changed. So last year, China inaugurated this import expo in Shanghai, which I find not only as a symbolic gesture that China is opening up for the foreign products, but I believe they truly want to change this imbalance in the interest of the whole geopolitical project, which is Belt and Road Initiative. Because if there are so many imbalances in trade with so many countries, it would be very hard to succeed with such a project. So, coming back to your question about the goods being imported from Europe to China, well, when we look at Germany, which Germany actually is quite a successful country in trading with China, because 50% of the European Union trade is actually being produced in Germany. So we are also in relation to German economy, that we do a lot of, well, we work as a subcontractors. So we do a lot of parts, for example, so spare parts, a lot of parts for German cars. And to my surprise, a lot of German cars are being imported from Europe, even though there were many factories actually set up in China. But Chinese consumers, they do not trust in products, in goods being produced in China. So they want to import the original German cars from Germany, even though these cars are being produced in China. So I was very surprised of this distrust, but this is how Chinese consumers actually prefer about the European products as the quality, and also the food, because we had some scandals in China in the last couple of years, especially milk is being imported from Europe. So Chinese consumers trust in the quality of European food products. But I think as China is advancing and it announced this China 2025 project, that means that China is going to become the developed economy in the next 5-6 years. They are moving up the development ladder, and they want to establish itself as a country being good at IT, artificial intelligence, and like high tech. So I think they would try to outsource the production of other goods to other countries, and the train connections would be an advantage. So I can imagine that in the next 5 or 10 years, a lot of food products would be produced in Poland and exported to China, because China itself would move up to other industries, maybe more profitable, like 5G or I don't know, IT, artificial intelligence, and others. So that's what seems very evident and quite obvious from my perspective, as a perspective of the person who is visiting China very often and who talks to Chinese authorities and Chinese entrepreneurs. You asked me about the education. I think in Poland we have. I think that's everywhere in the world, but in Poland we have so many delegations from China, and all of them they want to observe, they want to make notes, they want to know what's going on. So they work very hard, and there is like really debate in China. There's a competition between different educational centers, or maybe not the educational centers, but I mean the universities. But the universities are more like think tanks, so they compete with their own ideas how to develop this Belt and Road Initiative project. So it's not a surprise, because starting from Confucius, I may say, the education was always very important part of Chinese culture and Chinese identity. So I think that one of the reasons that China was developing so quickly was the education and was the knowledge, the approach to accumulate the knowledge. So I think China is very good at that. So that's why we have so many delegations from China, and they want to learn about everything, actually, about the agriculture, about the logistics. Maybe you met some Chinese delegations as well.
Yeah, well, I'm a teacher, and as a teacher, you always have different experiences with different groups of people. You have good students, you have bad students, and if I could think of the perfect student, regardless of where they're from, I'm thinking of a certain set of characteristics. And I think of all the different nationalities that I've taught, this is kids. I've always found that the Chinese rank very highly in the good qualities, what makes a good student.
Yes, exactly. So that was actually also the experience of Vietnamese students and pupils we had in Poland, because we have like huge Vietnamese diaspora, and they started to settle down in Poland since the 80s. So right now it's the third generation. So they integrated to society in the last 3 decades. But I also had teachers in my family, and they also said that the Vietnamese people, I mean, the children, the Vietnamese children, or the people of Vietnamese origin, they were the best students actually at school. And I think it's all because of this idea, the knowledge and the self development. They are the virtues that are very much valued in this civilization and in this society. So I think it's coming back to the global issues we are discussing. I think it's also one of the reasons that China developed so well in the last decades, because they had this approach to knowledge. And this is a good thing about China. So if I whenever I had an influence on something in Poland, whenever I can inspire anybody, like if anybody asks me, like, what is worth imitating from China, I would say that this is this approach to knowledge, and it's also the very much important part of the Belt and Road Initiative, because you have like many initiatives under the umbrella of this Belt and Road Initiative narrative, because it's also a narrative. There is also the people-to-people exchange and the scientific cooperation, establishing think tank platforms. So it shows how important it is for Chinese, and also how skillful they are in collecting the knowledge, collecting the information, and transforming it into ideas and into like solutions which are very useful in developing this project of BRI.
Okay, a quote for you now. When one great power threatens to displace another, war is almost always the result, but it doesn't have to be. This is a quote from Graham Allison, whose big idea recently has been the Thucydides Trap. What are your thoughts on this, and where do you see this debate moving in Poland?
This is a very good point, actually. This is a very interesting issue because we don't believe there's any trap. So as you know, we are one of the most pro-American societies in the world. So we believe that there is no trap, that America is the greatest country in the world. So sooner or later, the result can be only one, that is maintaining the 20th century global order. I think that is what Donald Trump is trying to do, actually, is to maintain the global order as it was before 2016 or even before that. So there is no debate about that. And I don't think that there is no debate about the Thucydides Trap. Because nobody really actually believes, I think, that China is a real threat to the United States, and that the global order, as we know, from the end of 20th century may change. Why is that so? I think it is so because this idea, this belief, guaranteed Poland 3 decades of stability after 1989. And I think that everybody believed in the so-called idea of the end of history. So nobody really believes that China is a game changer, and that the United States would have any difficulties to restore the global order as it was before 2016. Wow. So this is how we see the things from the perspective of, like the middle income country in the Central Eastern Europe, as Poland is.
Okay, we have to end it there. Radek Pyffel, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. That was a pleasure to be your guest, Thomas. Thank you.